Are you ready for an episode that goes beyond the ordinary? Join me on Almost Above Average as I sit down with the extraordinary Dale Pollack, a multi-talented individual who wears many hats in the world of filmmaking, education, and literature. On this episode, we delve into the depths of social justice, the inner workings of Hollywood, and the remarkable journey of a trailblazer like no other. Dale shares his unique experiences working with legendary actors such as the late Paul Walker, Ethan Hawke, and Denzel Washington, bringing you behind the scenes of iconic films like Set It Off, Blaze, and House of Cards. Get ready to be inspired, entertained, and enlightened as we uncover the secrets of success in the industry from someone who has truly seen it all. But wait, there's more. Help us grow our podcast family by leaving a 5-star review and sharing this episode with a loved one. Our goal is to reach 5,000 subscribers, and with your support, we can make it happen. Tune in, buckle up, and get ready to be captivated. This is Almost Above Average like you've never experienced before. Now let's go to the conversation with Dale Pollack. The first time I met you was at my very first Rotary Club meeting in downtown Raleigh, and that day you were speaking about your new novel, Chopped. And I remember you were telling the story of writing the book, and I just remember I was so fascinated by that. And then when I approached you about the book and asked you about the podcast, you were very inviting and warm, and I appreciate that. But I want to tell you this little story. So you agreed to do the podcast, and I've only done a couple of these things. And so I get home to do my research, and I pull up your catalog, and I was intimidated immediately. So it took me a little. I know. I mean, I know that's not unreasonable, but you have such a body of work that it was impressive. When I was reading your Wikipedia, I was like, man, I want mine to look like that. You know,
thank you.
Of course. So, I mean, I had a bunch of things that I was going to try to talk about, but really what I'm interested in, I want to know, who you are, where you came from and how you got into all this artistic stuff that you did.
As always in life, it's a long and winding road. So,
right.
I had a pretty normal suburban childhood growing up in the 1950s and 60s in Cleveland, Ohio. But the thing that really changed me was my brother went to Yale, and he founded the Yale Film Society. And I used to go up to visit him, and they would have a projector set up in their suite, and they would watch 16 millimeter prints of classic movies 24 hours a day. And that was so exciting to me. And so when I went to college, I went to Brandeis University, which is in Waltham, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. I started the Brandeis Film Society. So, I was already inculcated into this idea of classic films are worth spending time with and worth watching. And then when I was in college, I collaborated with two other guys who ran their college film societies. And we actually leased a movie theater that we named the Orson Welles Cinema in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not far from Harvard University, about midway between Harvard and MIT. And we did the same kind of programming we did for our film societies, and it was very popular. And that's what really got me into movies. And, at one point I thought I wanted to be a screenwriter. And after trying to do that, I very quickly realized I didn't have that special sauce. So, for me, journalism was my way into the movie business. I don't think I really thought of it as that. I mean, I worked as my high school, the editor of my high school newspaper. But when I got hired by a daily paper in Santa Cruz, California, it was an afternoon paper. That was really my introduction to journalism. That led me to my job with Daily Variety, which led me to my job with the LA Times, which led me to my job working with David Geffen as a development executive, which led me to my job becoming the head of a film production company that was owned by a record label, A&M Films. And then, I was very fortunate and able to make 13 feature films in 10 years.
Yeah,
so
there's a crazy amount.
I had a good run for my career. I left feeling kind of on top because I never wanted to be a 70 or 75-year-old producer schlepping my script around Hollywood, begging for a development deal. That wasn't the fate I wanted for myself.
Right.
So, I was lucky. I was given the opportunity to teach at USC in a graduate program called the Peter Stark Program for young producers. And I
Hmm.
was producing at the time. And then I left USC and went to the American Film Institute and co-founded the producing program there that was very successful. And that led me to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in
Nice.
Winston-Salem, where I have been for the last 25 years.
I love that. Was it your older brother that ran the film thing? Was he your
Yes, he
older brother?
was. Yep. And
That sounds
we
like an
still
older
talk all
brother
the
type
time
thing.
about movies. He's
That,
still
that
a
reminds
friend.
me of my older brother. Like I always idolized everything my older brother did, and I tried to follow as much in his footsteps as I could. So that's
Same
funny.
here.
And then writing for these papers is what led you into writing scripts for movies.
Yeah, and I realized really quickly that that was not my gift. I,
No.
I, I it's a very particular skill to be able to
Hmm.
be a good screenwriter. The examples of bad screenwriting are all around us. So
Right.
to be a really good screenwriter is something special. And I realized that wasn't my forte. But what I did have, I think, was a strong sense of story from
Hmm.
having watched so many movies. And I mean, I've seen close to 5,000 films in
Yeah.
my life and career. I've kept track of almost all the titles I've ever watched. So, I
Nice.
mean, I'm pretty conversant in film language. And I
Yeah.
felt that as a producer, that really helped me because I could relate to writers, I could give them good story notes. So the
Hmm.
fact that I understood story and knew what good writing was didn't mean that I was a good screenwriter, but it did mean that I could be a good producer.
Right.
Because, if you're a producer, you want to have a strong sense of the story your director and your screenwriter are telling, because
Right.
that's what you have to believe in to sell the movie, literally and figuratively.
100%. What is the role of a producer in a movie? You're
Well,
not directing it, right?
no, no. And, this is probably one of the most misunderstood areas of the film
Yeah.
business because producers, there's so many different kinds. So I
Right.
was a certain kind of producer where I found my material. I worked with the writers to develop it to the point where it could get made. I took it out to the studios or the financiers to get it made. And then I worked closely with the writer and the director on any rewrites.
Okay.
So that was my role as a producer, very heavily in development. And then when the film started, I wanted to be on the set every day. And
Hmm.
that is not to the liking of many directors. They don't want a producer there every day in their
Because you're
face.
micromanaging them.
Yeah, but it was, I was responsible for the money. That's the
Right.
one thing people forget. There's somebody who signs, whether your budget is 2 million or 200 million. There's somebody who signs a contract that
Right.
says this film will not cost more than $200 million and you will deliver a 120-minute version of it.
Yep. You
And that
personally.
person is the producer. And so
Okay.
those responsibilities are serious.
Right. So
And so
you're
I was,
technically over the director then, right?
yeah, because when
Yeah.
it comes to the budget, that's my
Right.
domain. So,
Okay.
I evolved a certain way of working as a producer. Not
Hmm.
every director liked that. Not every director liked having a producer on the set. I felt I ran a lot of interference and helped directors by
Yeah.
taking problems off their shoulders and putting them on mine. So,
Okay.
what it gave me, because I was on the set constantly, was a
Hmm.
really good idea of what a good production should run like.
Nice.
So that was something I was able to bring to the film school, was a certain professional standard of how I thought we had to prepare our graduates so they would really be equipped to go work immediately on a
Right.
major film or a TV series. And what I'm
Taught him
proud
how
of
to push,
is,
keep pushing everything, right?
yep, and I'm very
Yeah.
proud of the School of the Arts. We have a very successful program for
Hmm.
training producers. And now we have a graduate program that does the same thing, creative producing.
That's an
So,
NC State, right?
I think it's just as valuable to turn out good producers as it is to turn out good writer directors. I
Right.
mean, you can't have one without the other and be successful.
Is it usually like writers become producers and directors, or directors become producers? What's the
It's
natural
more like
progression?
writers become producers and
Yeah.
writers. That's what's called the showrunner. The
Okay.
showrunner for a series is the writer producer. He
Okay.
has pretty much, he or she has total control because they hire the director to come in and do an episode. But then the
Right.
next
Okay.
episode, it will be a different director. So the continuity is in the writer producer. And that's
Right.
why they're really called the showrunner, because you can't run a series without that writer
Without 'em.
producer.
Yeah, they're the last say, right? They're directing traffic, kind of, and they're directing the
Yep,
director.
exactly. And most
Okay.
directors don't like that idea, but it's a
Yeah.
reality, particularly in television. The director
Right.
has less power in television.
Okay. That makes sense. So in a lot of you've done 13 of these things. It looks like the 90s were a pretty successful decade for you.
Well, I was very fortunate, and that was a time where you could still make low budget movies
Hmm.
under $5 million, and see them get a theatrical release. So
Right.
I kind of specialized in that. Almost all of my films were $12 million and under. I only had one really expensive film, and that was Blaze with Paul Newman. And that's
Yeah.
because Paul Newman alone was $5 million. So you can't make a low budget film with Paul Newman because
Right.
the entire budget goes toward his salary.
It goes to two actors, right? And the rest is for set and
E-
materials and all that stuff.
Exactly, exactly. So, I didn't really like working with big stars, but you can't get a movie made without a star. So I worked with Newman and Denzel Washington and Shirley MacLaine and Kathy Bates and
Yeah.
Kathleen Turner, all on lower budget films where it was the material that drew them.
Yeah.
And that's what I got the reputation for, was developing good material that could
The
attract.
actual content of your films, right?
Right,
That's what drew in these big names.
exactly.
That's
And
cool.
so I felt I was successful as that. I wish the
Yeah.
films had been more successful. It was painful sometimes to think I made a really good film. I did a little movie called The Midnight Clear, which
Hmm.
is Ethan Hawke's second film, Gary Sinise's first film as an actor,
Oh
Kevin
man.
Dillon's film, and that film cost $4.5 million, and it made $5,000. The
Oh my.
distributor went belly up. Nobody got to see the movie. I got rave reviews, and the film was in a legal strongbox for decades. The
Yeah.
deals were so messed up. So, that was a very frustrating thing to be able to have a film. We thought a script that good, a cast that good, a very good director, and a really film that got top reviews, and then nobody sees it. So that's
Man.
kind of the height of frustration. And that's one reason why ultimately decided to stop trying to produce films and go back to helping young people learn how to make good films and start
Yeah, there you go.
getting the frustration out of my life and putting it into inspiration into their
Yeah,
lives.
into teaching, right? God, I
Right.
can imagine you put all that work and time and you produce the thing. You're probably proud of it. You're probably anxious it's going to come out, and then it comes out and does nothing. I can't imagine what that does for
Yeah.
your psyche.
It's devastating. It's just
Yeah,
devastating. And you can't do it that often because you get so depressed about
right.
the process.
I
I
bet.
can look back now and know that I made a really good movie. If people watch it now, they agree
Mhm.
that it's a really good movie. It's been called one of the best anti-war films of all time. Steven
Mhm.
Spielberg screened it for his entire cast and crew when he was doing Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the film is respected. Somebody dug up a recent review on Siskel and Ebert, and they gave it two thumbs up. And I had
See?
never seen that review. So that
Yeah.
was really fun for me to see how much they enjoyed the movie. So,
Yeah.
but you go through a few of those and it gets pretty depressing. And that's what really drove me to teaching rather than
Mhm.
doing, because I felt, okay, I had my decade. I made a lot of films. At
Yeah.
least three of them I thought were really good. And so now I can leave that behind and go on to my next career, which will be teaching.
Yeah.
And as most teachers will tell you, it's the most rewarding career you can choose, I
Right.
think, because you see how your impact on your students has a real effect on their lives.
Right.
And so when I have a student who's coming in their first year for film school, and after 4 years, they know exactly what they want to do and how to do it, that makes me feel just as
Right.
good as making a feature film made me feel.
I would argue it probably makes you feel better because you like that impact, at least in my experience, when I know that I've had that type of impact on another person, that is more rewarding than anything. No money, no success or accolades could take
I
that away.
completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And so, that was the second part of my career, was teaching and loving the impact that it had on my students.
Hmm.
And now I'm in my third career, which is actually my fourth kind of, which is writing.
Right.
And I'm already at work on my next novel. So,
I saw that. Yeah.
yep, that's my future.
Right. And you're a amazing storyteller.
Well,
The
thank you.
Your book was great. Let me ask you this: are you a Patriots fan?
A Boston Patriots?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, of course. I went to school there. But that was pre-Patriots. I was at
Okay.
school in 68,
Pre
72.
dynasty.
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Burlington, Vermont, so my whole family's all Patriots fans, and they're
There we go.
heavily is written in Boston, chopped, or it takes
Right.
place in Boston. And I was reading some of your stuff on Wikipedia, and it seems you have a New England
I do. And I
tie.
have a son who lives in Boston now, and I have a son who lives in Providence, Rhode Island. So we are
Nice.
still a New England-oriented family.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So what was your favorite movie to make? What is your favorite one of all of them?
Um, I would probably say my favorite one to make was A Midnight Clear,
Hmm.
because it was a bunch of young actors. We were very united in the same goal. I mean, I had a great experience making Set It Off
Hmm.
in Los Angeles, but that was an action movie that we had to make on a low budget. That was the
Yeah.
most stressful film I made,
Really?
because we were just fighting the budget all the time and trying to do these big action sequences with Queen Latifah and Jada Pinkett. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a challenge. And honestly, it was a challenge being a white producer on an all black film with a black director.
I
I
imagine.
mean,
I did want to ask about that.
yeah, you couldn't escape what it looked like. But
Right.
I had a very collaborative relationship with F. Gary Gray. And
Hmm.
so together I felt, I mean, he would bring me back. He didn't feel the dialogue was black enough. So he wanted to work on the dialogue, and he would give me dialogue and I would try to make it work for the script. So we ended up in a very collaborative relationship. And look, that film launched his career. There's
Right.
no Straight Outta Compton without Set It Off.
Right.
So
Right.
he benefited greatly from Set It Off. I'm very happy he did. I think he's an immensely talented filmmaker who's gone
Hmm.
on, to do really good movies.
Yeah.
So I would
Absolutely.
say, that was gratifying in terms of all the effort we put into led to success. That film cost $11 million. The gross is now up to 82 million.
Wow. Yeah. Nice. I
So
mean,
it was
Set It Up was a big
extreme.
movie when I was a kid.
Yeah, and it's screened still all the time
Yeah.
on Fox and BET. It's one of the
Nice.
most popular black film titles of all time.
Yeah.
So it's gratifying to know that I made a movie that's had that kind of impact in a
Right.
community.
Yeah.
So that,
There's.
and then the very first film I did, called The Beast,
Hmm.
which was directed by Kevin Reynolds before he went on to do Robin Hood and Waterworld.
Okay.
And I think he's actually the single best director I ever worked with. I think
Hmm.
he is a great American filmmaker. I feel very honored that I got to make his second feature film. And it's a film, if you go back and watch it today, it's even more powerful than when we made it, because of history. We made a pro Mujahideen movie a pro-Islamist terrorist movie because they were
Yeah.
fighting the Russians in the 1980s.
Yeah, I guess they're not
So we
terrorists in that
glorified
respect.
them.
Right.
20 years later, we're fighting them. But at the
Yeah.
time we made the movie in 1987, it was a really audacious film. Columbia Pictures dumped it. They wanted
Oh,
nothing to do with it. It was too political for them.
yeah.
And we got an invitation from the Moscow Film Festival, and Columbia would not let us take the movie.
Really?
Yeah, they thought it
That
would be bad press for them that we had a film that played well in Moscow. And it was just ridiculous. We made a film about the Russian invasion of Afghanistan.
yeah.
So there were frustrations like that, but those three films, Midnight Clear, Set It Off, and The Beast, are the three best films I made.
The Beast one, that's the one about what we were just talking about, right?
Yeah, the Islamist,
Afghanistan.
the
Or Islamist.
Mujahideen in
I do want to
Afghanistan.
watch that one.
Yeah.
I watched Set It Off last night, and I started watching, which one was it? Oh, a Midnight. No, it was another one. I started watching
Midnight
some
Clear
of
is
them.
hard to find, as is The Beast.
Yeah, I couldn't find a bunch of them. Or Mrs. Winterborn, that's what I started watching.
Yeah.
Brendan Fraser was in
But,
that.
that was a great script. Unfortunately, the studio had a deal with Ricky Lake. They produced a talk show.
Yeah.
So
I remember Ricky.
we were told Ricky Lake's going to star in your movie. And if you don't want Ricky Lake to star in it, then you won't make your film.
Huh.
So, Richard Benjamin, the director, and I had to look at each other. We were 2 years preparing the script for Mrs. Winterborn, and it was all going to go away if we didn't take Ricky Lake.
Ricky Lake.
So we took Ricky Lake, and I think she gives the best performance of her film career, which is not too notable.
I was going to say her only performance, maybe.
Well, no, she's in what was the John Waters film? Hairspray. She's in Hairspray. She's pretty good in Hairspray, but she didn't carry Hairspray as the star. She was the star of Mrs. Winterborn.
Yeah.
And that just really wasn't in her dramatic makeup.
Okay.
That was a challenge for her.
So the movie didn't do too well, I imagine?
No. Film did not do very well because there was no film audience that wanted to see Ricky Lake. And unfortunately, when we made Mrs. Winterborn, the best person in the movie is Brendan Fraser.
Right.
And we were before George of the Jungle or any of his big hits.
Yeah, he's a young Brendan Fraser in that one. You also had a young Paul Walker in one of your movies, right?
Beat the Deedles, his very first film. A completely forgettable film, except for the performance of Paul Walker.
Well, so Meet the Deedles, Set It Off, I've heard of, in House of Cards. Like, I all remember from the 90s. Like, I don't remember watching Meet the Deedles, but I remember the name.
You had to be really quick to watch it in the theater. It was, it's depressing, but it's a reality. Disney never even released it on a DVD.
Really?
No, they did a VHS.
Where do you find it now?
You can find it maybe on the Disney Channel, possibly.
Well, it's probably on their streaming app now.
They never did a DVD release of it, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, why is that?
Because
didn't do enough in theater.
The director was a stunt director.
Yeah.
I was brought onto the film. Everything was already set. My job was to help him direct the best movie he could direct. And I have to admit, I didn't do a good job of that.
No? Now I got to watch that, Dale.
Yeah. What's funny is it does have a part for Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
Dennis Hopper is one of the great characters in American movie history. My little Dennis Hopper story was we hired him. We sent him the script. He had, I think, 4 days of work in the film. And we agreed to fly him up. We were shooting in Park City, Utah. We agreed to fly him up to the Sundance Resort, put him and his family up for the week that he would be here.
Yeah.
And the night before he's ready to start, he comes to the set and comes up to me because I had met him when we made the offer. The director actually had never even met him. He was just going on the reputation of Dennis Hopper. So Dennis Hopper comes up to me and says, "So what's the film about?" And I said, "Well, you read the script, right?" He went, "No, I don't read the scripts anymore."
Wow. All right.
And so I said, "Well, do you know your lines? Do you know your part?" He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "I do that every day. I memorize the day's work and I do it that day."
Huh.
And he said, "I've got my assistant. He runs lines with me. And don't worry, I'll know exactly what I'm doing." But I
Wow.
said, "You really took this film without ever reading the script?" He went, "Yeah, I do that all the time." So
What if you were a serial killer or something?
that was unique. I had never, and he's fine in the movie. He
Yeah.
never fumbled for a line, so his system worked. But that
Wow.
was the biggest, I think, the biggest shock I ever got a producer was an actor coming up to me the night before he started work and telling me that he had never read the script.
Yeah. And then come out the next day and record all his parts with no problem.
Exactly, no problem.
He's built different.
Yes, yep.
Yeah. That's awesome. There was also like a when I was reading the book, and I know I've set it off, and I think there was another movie I was looking through. There's kind of like a social justice theme in the background. Does that come from anywhere, or is that just a creative?
No, I think it comes very much from the person I was shaped to be by my parents, who were
Okay.
very religious and very ethical in their own way. And,
Hmm.
my dad was upset when he thought I was going into Hollywood because he thought it was a really bad place filled with bad people who would, not honor contracts and would try to screw you. He had been in the record business briefly as a
Hmm.
salesman, and he didn't like the record business. So when I went to work for a record label that had a
Yeah.
film company, he was even more distrustful. But I was drawn to stories that are about social justice in a way. And as
Hmm.
I look back on the films I made, I think there's really a theme there. And it's
Yeah.
even in films like The Mighty Quinn with Denzel Washington and
Okay.
in A Home of Our Own with Kathy Bates, where she's a single mother with 6 kids. And at the beginning of that movie, there
Hmm.
is a scene of sexual abuse in the workplace, and
Yeah.
her boss tries to touch her inappropriately, and she hits him, and she's fired. And that was very real when we were making those films in the
Yeah.
90s. So every film I made, from Plays to Home of Our Own to House of Cards to Set It Off, has social justice as a theme in there somewhere. And so I'm really impressed and pleased that you picked that out
Yeah.
from my body of work, because I was never drawn to just making a film for entertainment. I wanted
Nice.
my movies, and even in the most subtle way, to say something, to
Right.
make some comment about the human condition, because that's what I think good art does. That's why you relate to it. It says something about the condition that you can relate to in some way.
Yeah.
That's what I
I
try to
agree with
do in
that
Top,
completely.
what I try to do in all my movies. It's what I'm
I
going to
think
try to do
it
in my
could be
next
even
book.
unintentional. I think like when you feel powerful, like I'm an artist too, like I create things and I don't necessarily intend to put messages in my art, but they show up. Things I'm going through show up no
Right.
matter what.
Yep.
And that seems like one of those scenarios because it spans kind of your whole career. And
Yes,
I
it
just read
does.
your newest book. So,
And it wasn't something where I said, all right, now I'm going to make a movie or I'm going to write a book about how unclear the truth is. I
right.
didn't realize how unclear the truth was till I wrote Chopped,
Right.
until I had to think about what would this guy really do? How would this woman really react to these
Yeah.
circumstances? So, I found it wasn't what I planned, but I found that it happened. Now I'm more conscious of it. And my next book deals very explicitly with race.
Okay.
And that's a very charged subject right now,
Yeah.
particularly for an older white writer to
Hmm.
tackle, right? But I'm excited about it. I'm excited about going into these somewhat dangerous waters because
Yeah.
I've got a great story. It needs to be told. I've got a way of telling it. And I'm not going to shy away from writing about race in contemporary America
Yeah.
because I can write about it very effectively in the past
Yeah.
and have people draw their own conclusions.
You were very effective in writing about it. It's a dicey. It's kind of like walking a tightrope. I imagine as a white man writing about anything having to do with slaves or black,
Right. And
just
I
black
very
culture.
purposely introduced the Underground Railroad and the
Yeah.
abolitionist movement into CHOP because I
Yeah.
wanted to give that perspective. I
I
wanted to
love
be
that
there
perspective.
something other than just the white universe. I also
Right.
tried, the Irish were a very picked on minority.
Yep. I
So,
picked that up a lot too. They
yeah,
to me the book had the Irish people and the black people kind of in the
yes,
same boat. And what I found really great about the book is you really captured, at least in my mind, even if you made it up, the way people talked and treated each other of that time, because that's it was in the 1840s 1850s time period. And I think you captured, when I read it, I didn't feel like I was reading a book that was written this century. I felt like I was reading a book from those times it was actually written. It was great. I really enjoyed
well,
it.
thank you. I really worked hard on that. And I'm
I can
doing it
tell.
again in my next novel, which is set in 1918, right at
Okay.
the end of World War One and right in the middle of the influenza epidemic.
Yeah.
So there should be elements that contemporary readers can really identify with in this book.
So when I met you, you were talking about writing the book of Chopped and how it took, what, 7 years or something like that. Can you
Well,
take me
the
through why?
actual
And
the whole process was 22 years
oh
from the
man.
time we first conceived of trying to write it as a novel to the
Hmm.
time we actually published it.
Right.
A number of all those years, I was working a full-time job. So whatever I did, I was doing in my free time.
Yeah. At
And
night.
yeah, and it became, pretty clear to me from the very beginning of Chopped that, it was going to be a tough sell for a first-time novelist. Period. Historical fiction is
I
not
don't
the
know. I
most.
couldn't tell that was your first novel. I couldn't tell that was the first time
Well,
anything.
thank
That was
you.
very well written.
Well, it's because I did 22 drafts. And this was my wife as my editor being very tough and
Yeah.
reading, and it was a big read every time, a big slog. And she would turn to me and say, "You know what? You can do better." So I would go
Oh
back
man.
again and cut and cut. And I mean, there are some changes I maybe wish I hadn't made. Some people find it difficult to get into the story because I
Hmm.
set up the three most important characters at the beginning: George Parkman, John Webster, and James Winchell Stone.
Hmm.
The original beginning I had of the book, where the book began, was the night that they discovered the remains. And James Winchell Stone is hustled out of bed and brought
That
down,
makes
and
sense.
boom, you were right there in the action. And
Okay.
sometimes I wish I had stuck with that opening, but I did listen to the feedback I got. And the feedback I got was, we don't understand the characters well enough. We don't understand the setting. We
Hmm.
don't understand that we're in 1850 Boston. So I went back and did what I had been advised to do, which was set up the three main characters.
Right.
Um, that's about the only change I question that I made. Writing draft after draft was a great education for me as a writer,
Yeah.
and being forced to know, cut, get rid of all the adverbs in the book. Literally, I
All
went
of them.
through and tried to get rid of every adverb.
Okay.
And it was things like that, learning how to become a good fiction prose writer.
All right.
And I do think that my years in the movie business and my years as a film critic and just watching as many as films as I've watched made my writing a little more cinematic. I think my
Yeah.
writing has some visual
That's a
power.
good way to describe it. That's what it felt like, a movie. Because in the beginning, when you were setting up the characters, I think that's correct. Like I didn't get super into it, but there's a point in the book at all times. I'm like, oh yeah, that was in the beginning. Now I know why. So I think it worked out perfectly
Well, thank you.
in this
Thank
for
you.
the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, writing, the best writing is rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And then coming to a point where you have to stop. you can't rewrite the thing forever.
Right.
And that was also where having my wife as my partner in this, she's the publisher. She basically has done everything to make the book actually happen. And she
Hmm.
was a very good editor for me and kept pushing me to do better. And
Nice.
I think that's why the book reads the way it reads now. I'm proud of it. And the next book will be better because she'll push me on that book too. So,
Does that
it's
cause any
great.
conflict in the relationship?
Well, when you can take that conflict in relationship and use it creatively,
Hmm.
that's a great thing. So, look, we've been married for 50 years. So we're partners in a lot of different ways. But her
Yeah.
partnership in this book was critical. I
Nice.
honestly, I don't think I could have done this all by myself. I
Fair.
needed support, I needed encouragement, I needed someone to be tough with me and to say, no, you can do this better. So the process was really very good for us and for our relationship. And when you
Nice.
can say that after 50 years, that's pretty good.
I really admire that you guys can have a working relationship and also collaborate on a creative project. Is she
Yeah.
just a super creative person also?
Yes, but in very different ways. She's a musician, and she's a
Oh,
very, very talented musician. She plays
okay.
fiddle, she can play piano, she can play the tin flute, she can play a lot of different instruments. But her
Nice.
creativity is in music. But
Yeah.
creativity is creativity.
Right.
And that was the key thing that linked us on this project.
I think if you can think creatively, it's a thing. You can do it with everything, right?
Right. Yep.
Versus not being creative at all. And yeah, as long
Absolutely
as
true.
someone is creative, you can collaborate.
Yes. Yep.
So that the story of Chopped is a true story, but the book you wrote you made some parts up, right?
Right. Well, every character in the book is real, except
Mm-hmm.
for the Irish characters who I invented. Uh, you know, um,
Like
the
Ellen's
girl, the
dad.
Irish girl, her father, Ellen, her father, the other Irish characters.
Yeah.
Everybody else is real. And I read a lot of writing of the period. I read the
Okay.
early novels that were written in the early 1800s in America. I read a lot of prose from that period. So I had a
Mm-hmm.
good idea of how people spoke and how literally they constructed their sentences and
Yeah.
used certain formal language. And then it was just really immersing myself. What did people wear? What did they eat?
Yep.
How did they amuse themselves? What time did they get up in the morning? When did they go to bed?
You're even
What was
using
it
their
like
slang. You were using
living
their
the
slang
world
terms and stuff.
by candlelight?
Right.
Whale oil was just beginning to come in as a substance for illumination.
Right.
There are so many things were just happening in that 1845 to 1850 period. The fact that any reporter could cover the murder trial and then go telegraph his
Yeah.
his story.
That's
That wouldn't
crazy.
have happened
That's
5 years
crazy.
later. That
Right.
happened just in 1850.
That's
So there
crazy.
were so many things historically that happened in the period of my story that I
Hmm.
was able to really immerse myself in 19th century America and
Yeah.
learn, God, people ate so much in those days. So many
They.
people were heavy that we think, oh, no, no, no. Americans are just heavy now. No, no,
Yeah.
no. Back in 1850, you had people who were seriously overweight because
Uh-huh.
they overate.
It's always been a
And
problem.
6 courses in a dinner, no problem.
Yeah. That's
So
not good.
it was fun doing that. It's so different from our time.
Right.
And now I'm doing the same thing. I'm immersing myself in 1918 in North Carolina, where my
Hmm.
story is set. I'm really
Nice.
trying to get a sense of what was it like to be alive in 1918 North Carolina. It's exactly what I did with what was it alive to be alive in 1850 Boston
So
when
that consists
things
of
are
just reading books
changing.
of the time, right? Eating food of the
Yes,
time, finding
and
out, doing research.
research. I mean, I consulted more than 100 books on this subject,
Hmm.
including the 6 nonfiction books written about the Parkman Webster murder.
Yeah.
6 different nobody had dealt with it fictionally, so that was my opportunity.
Okay.
And I read novels of the period. I read histories of the period. I found timelines of the period.
Yeah.
I talked to the costume designers at the School of the Arts, so I would be able to describe the wardrobe accurately using
Right.
the proper 19th century terms for the
Yeah.
wardrobe. So it was little elements like that that I used. I hoped, and I was glad it worked for you, that you felt you were back in that time,
Yeah,
that you
absolutely.
were in the era of my story, because
Yeah.
that was really important to me. Immersion. I wanted
Yep.
to immerse the readers in this world.
Yeah. I did, even if I said that earlier, even if you made it up, like I couldn't tell the difference. Like, you could have totally just made up how that scene is, and that's how I felt it should be. You know?
It was really important for me that it be real,
That's great.
that it
It
be
was.
tied to reality.
You know what? There was something else I picked up on, or maybe it's just me, but your wife's last name is O'Keefe.
Yes.
So are you James? And
No.
okay.
I mean, I'm James in a certain sense.
Yeah.
And I did use my wife's name, but actually, Ellen is based on more on one of my daughter's friends who was
Okay.
named Ellen and had a
Right.
very distinctive personality.
Yeah.
So I used her name and a lot of her personality. I had a visual of this amazing woman from the 1850s who was one of the first American female photographer. Her
The
name
first
was
American
Julia
female?
Cameron.
Okay.
And she was the first woman to use the new science of photography. And she had this great look and this mane of red hair.
Hmm.
And that's what I used as my model for Ellen.
Okay. I
Yeah.
like that.
So
Did the
based on
did
a very real character.
the phonography stuff in there, was that true? Like it was just coming out, and was it part of the actual trial?
It was. And
Okay.
we had people, there was actually, this is pretty strange. There was very little real source material on the real James Winchell Stone.
Hmm.
I could find his name in the Boston directories as a doctor. I could go and find out his Harvard career at the Harvard Library in the alumni section. But in terms of what was he really like, we had to simply invent that. And
Okay.
so he's a little bit of me. He's a little bit of my wife's father, who was also a Stone,
Okay.
and so there was some stuff, but mostly I just saw him as a second person, not me. I didn't write him from a first person. That's why I didn't want to use first person narration.
Yeah.
He's an objective character of the book. He's third
Right.
person like everybody else in the book, and I wanted to keep him that way.
Yeah.
But he is my protagonist, and he is my eyes and ears.
Right.
So I did have to give him a personality not dissimilar from my own in
Yeah.
terms of his curiosity.
So you could keep
He
it
wants to
familiar while you're
know
writing.
he wants to know more about everything. And that's
Right.
kind of who I am as a writer. I want to know more about everything in this world.
Yeah.
And so I tried to make him an extension of me in that regard.
Okay.
But he's also what was so interesting, and you don't realize this until you write fiction for the first time. Your characters do develop a mind of their own. He
Yeah.
did things that surprised me as I wrote. And
Yeah.
that was, when I was writing about George Lucas and skywalking, I didn't have that freedom. I had to
Yeah.
stick to what George Lucas said or what I said. But in
Stick to the
writing
fact.
Top, I had the freedom to
Right.
make him both real historical and also someone different from me.
Kind of have
Someone
fun with
who,
him, right?
yeah, and that's so interesting when you say, well,
Yeah.
I might have done this, but my character decided to do that.
Well, you could play with your fantasy, right? Like I would totally do this in this situation, but James would want to do something like this, and then write that into the story.
Exactly. And
I
boy,
like that.
that was really fun as a writer,
Yeah,
giving him that freedom to be his own person and not have to just be an extension of me.
I really like that. Yeah, I've been trying to write a couple books, but I've never done it before. So we'll see how
Well,
it goes.
Yeah, it's a tough process, but I will tell you, hang in there. It's rewarding
Yeah,
at the end.
I hope so. But part of why it makes me pause is like originally my idea was to write a serial killer story based on one of my kids, but I'm worried about the fallout from that later. you know,
Yeah. Well,
like
don't worry
Dad, you
about
think I'm a
it.
serial killer? Like, no, I don't. I love you.
Just fictionalize more. That's all.
Right, more fiction.
Right.
Maybe that's what I gotta do.
Yeah.
Why did you pick that story, the murder of George Parkman?
Uh, well, because it was part of my wife's family history. I mean,
Oh,
it was part of
Stone.
the family history that my wife's great great grandfather had
Hmm.
been this doctor in Boston, had a significant part in the biggest murder trial of the 19th century to that point, and
Huh.
had published this book, the transcript of the trial, that survived all the moves of the family. That survived
Wow.
James Winchell Stone's widow, took the book with her to Italy, where her one daughter married a count and the
Mhm.
other daughter married a British army officer. And that daughter took the book back to England. And from
Wow,
there, it ended up ultimately with my wife's mother, and then my wife, and then me.
that's awesome.
This was the document that inspired everything. There's no book without our having his original published transcription of the trial,
The phonographic report.
the phonographic report.
How is it available for everyone to read?
No,
Oh,
it's way out of print. To my
yeah,
knowledge, there are only 3 copies. The one we have, the one the Harvard Medical School Library has, and the
yeah.
one the Harvard Law School Library has. Those are
Man,
the only 3 copies I'm aware of.
that would be fascinating to read. Why don't you
But
publish that and put it out?
all the testimony from the trial in my book comes
Hmm.
directly from his transcription,
Okay, word for word.
word for word. I didn't change a
Nice.
word.
That's a fascinating story. What's to stop you from reprinting that?
It's written in a very mid 19th century way. Plus,
Yeah,
he realized very quickly while he's sitting there in court trying to take down everything that if he did the question of the witness, he would be late on the answer of the witness. So what he figured out, and it worked because I was able to use it, that the
hmm.
question would be implicit in the answer.
Okay,
So where were you on the night of February 11th, right?
right.
Rather than him taking down that question, he would start out the witness by saying, I was at this place at 11 o'clock that night. So the question I could figure out. So when I'm writing the actual courtroom scenes,
Hmm.
I'm making up the things that the attorneys say, but I'm not making up a word of what the witness says. That's verbatim as he
Okay,
took it down in the courtroom. And that was
right,
very important to me, to stay true to the actual words of the witnesses
right.
and not invent what I wish they had said.
Don't be creative there. That's an
I didn't
actual
want to be
account.
creative there. I wanted to
Yeah,
be accurate, historically accurate there.
right. One of the questions I had, I couldn't really picture it in my head. So, James is in there doing the photography, taking
Right?
down. How is he doing that? Is he writing symbols or is it
He's
a
writing
typewriter?
symbols with ink and, pens with a nib on them and stuff.
So he's just going
He's
real fast.
writing literally on a roll of parchment, a
Okay.
scroll almost.
So he's turning it and writing
He's
it.
turning it as he writes,
Huh.
because
That's
otherwise
fascinating.
he would have been awash in paper. And he
Right.
couldn't do that in the middle of the courtroom. He knew he couldn't.
Yeah.
So he literally used a scroll of paper.
So he was the human data recorder, just
Exactly.
rolling
Being, in
paper and
effect,
writing.
the very first court reporter in history. What
Okay.
does the court reporter do? They take down everything that's said in the courtroom.
Yeah. And they have symbols on their little thing instead of
Exactly. And he
letters.
had the same things. So,
No kidding. I think that is all fascinating. You know, just the
And
story of
apparently
technology.
there was a guy who had tried to take down some procedure in Congress, some kind
Hmm.
of trial, and after 2 days he gave up. It was too difficult.
Yeah.
The fact that James Winchell Stone stuck it out, took down the transcript of the entire 2-week trial,
Yeah.
then somehow, we have no idea, I had to make up how he dictated it to these young women who were the copyists, because there's
Right.
no record of how it went from the courtroom to his published version. So I had to
Ah,
invent that.
and so could have James,
Yeah.
technically, right?
Yep. That was our feeling. How else was he going to do it? He had to read it aloud to somebody.
Yeah. That's
So we
interesting.
gave, and that, of course, gave Ellen a pivotal thing to do in the story,
Right.
to be the
You gave
means
her
that
a
he would
role to
be
make sure that
able,
they work together, right? And then
exactly,
they fell in
and
love,
that
and
she
then
could find all the young ladies to take down the dictation.
yeah. Well, that was a very fascinating story. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Yeah. What about, I didn't really touch on the George Lucas biographies that you wrote. When
Right.
did those come out?
Well, I was the very first person to do a biography of him. It came out in 1983, just before the release of Return of the Jedi.
Oh man.
And it was very successful when it came out. It was serialized in Esquire, in Life magazine, um, and was very well reviewed nationally, and sold 150,000 copies.
Wow.
And to my amazement, is still in print now. 40 years after its original publication, people are still buying it.
That's
And
awesome.
what I discovered, and I can't believe I was this stupid, that I never did an audiobook for
Right.
Skywalking. So we're going to
Yeah.
do one now.
Okay, good.
I'm going to have the audiobook come out
Oh,
of Skywalking.
did you know I produce audiobooks?
I did not.
I do that. I was going to mention that I'm going to do an audiobook for the author that I just interviewed last week.
Oh, great.
But we could do that if you ever
Well,
need someone.
I have a guy now up in the guy who
Okay.
did the audiobook for Chop, who
Okay.
I worked really well with. He's done about
Oh, I
500
couldn't find the audiobook for Chopped. I was trying to.
It's coming out
Oh,
beginning of
okay.
April. I
was like,
recorded it myself.
I love
Um,
that.
I'm going to fly up at the end of March to do the final changes, replace
Okay.
all my flubs. And then
Yeah.
it will be available and on Audible right at the
Nice.
beginning of April.
At the beginning of April?
Yep.
All
So
right.
I'm very excited about that.
I'll try to put that in the show notes.
Yeah. And it was the first time I recorded an audiobook. I had no idea how I would do, but the guys who produced it were very pleased. And
Nice.
and it was fun for me. I never
Yeah.
read one of my books, right? A very weird experience.
And
having
hearing
to
your
read
voice is
everything
probably
out
weird,
loud.
right?
Pardon me?
Hearing your own voice, like your own work in your own voice, probably feels
Yeah.
weird. It does to me every time.
Me too. I hate my voice.
Yeah.
But
I
other
don't like
people
it.
tell me my voice is good, so I'll take their word for it.
It is good, and I get the same thing, so I'm going to take their
Right.
word for it as well.
Yep. You have a good voice also.
Thanks. When is your newest book coming out?
Well, I'm hopeful the research, I know it will not take me 12 years to do the research. And the fact that it's all where I live now is also makes it a whole lot easier. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that this book will be out in either late 2025 or early 2026.
Okay.
So I'm really hopeful next year.
Nice. I would love the opportunity to read that book as well when it comes out and get you back
I
on to
will
talk
make
about
sure
it.
you do.
Okay, great. That would be awesome. Where can everyone, my listeners, find you at on your socials? What social do you have?
DaleMPollock.com.
Dale
DaleMPollock.com.
Okay.
That's my website, and
All right.
it's very
Are
active.
you on any socials?
I do. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Facebook and LinkedIn?
Yep.
Okay.
And
I can put.
Instagram. My wife does all my Instagram postings.
Is she your social media director,
Yes, she is.
editor, and?
Yes.
I love it. Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey with Dale Pollack on Almost Above Average. We hope you enjoyed diving into the world of social justice, Hollywood, and the incredible insights shared by our guest. If you found this episode valuable and entertaining, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring conversations and stories. Your support means the world to us as we strive to reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Remember that your feedback is crucial to us. Please leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with your friends and family. Together, we can spread the word and continue to grow our community of listeners. Stay tuned for our next episode where we bring you more engaging content and fascinating guests. Until next time, keep dreaming big, stay inspired, and always remember that you are almost above average in everything you do. Thank you for listening, and see you on the next episode of Almost Above Average.